Okay, we're going to do chapter 21 now. The chapter is titled Trends in Preservation. It's not really aptly named. Part of it's about preservation, and then part of it is about biotechnology, which doesn't really have a whole lot to do with preservation, but I think they just didn't know exactly where to put it. It does go with trends and modern technology, but uh, yeah, the chapter could be named differently. We are going to skip the first part of this chapter on food irradiation. I've covered everything that I really want to cover on food irradiation already. So we're going to skip that big section, and that will get us down to a much more manageable level for this 1 week covering the full chapter. We'll also be skipping a smaller section that is trends in packaging, that's talking a lot about some other packaging things that's some a lot of that section isn't necessarily relevant because it's uh, outdated, and things that were trends then when the book was written aren't really trends anymore. And so we're just going to skip that section. So first we're going to talk about just packaging in general. And the three things that people who are packaging foods need to consider, um, three factors to consider, are that the packaging needs to maintain the quality of the food and prevent contamination. It needs to be economical. So you don't necessarily always go to the highest quality packaging right off the bat, because the highest quality packaging might make your food unaffordable. It must not affect the food itself. So you don't need to get packaging materials into the food. There's nothing from the packaging that should leach into the food and affect it in any way, be it flavor or chemically. This is a very large field in the food industry. There are whole companies that work on designing packaging for food producers. There are entire careers that are built on packaging. There are entire degrees that are built around packaging. There are package engineering degrees that people get to fully understand this set of the food industry. And the last major thing to know about packaging is that it is regulated by the FDA, because anything that is in direct contact with food has the potential to become a food additive. And so the FDA is going to regulate that and make sure that no harmful food additives are getting into the food. When we're talking about packaging, there are two general types of containers that we refer to. The first is a primary container, and that is just whatever packaging is actually coming into direct contact with the food. The secondary container is the packaging that holds the primary container. Okay, and so because that primary container is the one that comes in direct contact with the food, it's going to have much more regulations upon it versus the secondary container. So examples of primary versus secondary is when you have a bag of, when you buy a box of cereal or crackers, there is a bag that cereal is in. That is the primary container. And then that whole bag is in the box, which does not come in contact with the food and is the secondary container. I want to touch on one that's a little bit tricky, because there's, in some cases, you can sometimes have two primary containers. So in smoked sausage, so one of our primary containers is obvious, it's this plastic packaging, but also the casing of the sausage is also a primary container. So that intestine, edible casing that is around that sausage, it is in direct contact with the food, but it's also a form of packaging. So in this case of the smoked sausage, it has two primary containers. It's the sausage casing and the uh, package that the sausage is packaged in. And then the secondary container would be one that you don't necessarily see in the store, but it is there in the process of transporting that sausage to the grocery store. And that would be the cardboard case that those sausages are in. So packaging has various functions that we need to consider. So first, packaging acts as a barrier between food and anything that could contaminate that food. It also needs to be able to protect food from impact during shipping and storage, right? If our packaging is too flimsy, then it can get holes in it and no longer act as that barrier from contamination. If it is too flimsy, it can not protect the food and the food could break, like for example, crackers, right? If Let's think about chips, all right? They're in a bag that's filled with air, and all of that protects that food from impacts and crushing the chips. It also needs to protect food from moisture, gas, odors, light. These are all things that can affect the flavor, texture, shelf life of the food at a chemical level, not necessarily contaminating it, but ultimately affecting the food negatively if there is exposure to those things. And then finally, packaging identifies the contents of the food, right? We have to have a label on the packaging that follows USDA or FDA regulations that tells us what the contents are, what the nutrition value is, etc. Some packaging has some of these other functions, not all packaging. So some packaging acts also as the dispenser of that packaging. Okay, so the easy one to think of is ketchup packets, right? Like especially like the ones that have at Chick-fil-A that can either you can dip or squirt. Mayonnaise, the mayonnaise that squirts, right? We use that to dispense the package too. One that we don't necessarily think of as dispensing, but is any of our packages that are resealable. All right, we open it up, take what we need, just pour it out, reseal it. All right, and that has an excellent function of the packaging too. Some packaging is used to not only store the food, but in the process of cooking it and serving it. So a perfect example is frozen meals. Some packaging has a hermetic seal where nothing can enter or exit the package until it has been opened by the consumer. So, I mean, obviously canned goods would be like that. Chip bags are like that. You have a certain gas that's in there until it's opened. If you have a vacuum packaged meat products like your lunch meat, right? Nothing is going to get in there until the consumer opens it. However, there are some packaging that purposely allow certain substances in or out of the container. So the most excellent example of this is packaging that is for produce, and we'll get into this further in a little bit. But these packaging materials have a certain level of permeability, which means that they allow liquids and or gases to pass through. So for produce bags that are fully packaged, they're going to allow gas exchange because the produce needs oxygen so that the produce is still kind of alive and doesn't start to rot. And it needs to be able to release CO2 and exchange those gases. However, it's not going to be able to, or the package will keep in all of the moisture, right? So the permeability of the packaging is such that it allows molecules that are as small as oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out, but not allow larger molecules such as water in or out. So there are six types of packaging materials, six general types, but overall, like if I'm going to go through like general types, but within those, there are hundreds of packaging materials to choose from. And, which one you actually pick for your product depends on several factors. It depends on the amount of protection you need. So how thick does that plastic need to be? Or are we protecting it from moisture, or is moisture not a factor? For example, the conditions of shipping and storage, how likely is this going to be jostled? Does it need to be kept at refrigeration temperatures, or is it going to be kept at room temperature in a warehouse? The process that's used to preserve the food. Sometimes the packaging is part of the process to preserve it, such as canning or retort packages. The chemical contents of the food. So certain packaging materials are not as good for certain substances as others. So if it's a high acidic food, it needs to be in a packaging that can withstand that high acidity, for example. So now we're going to go through 6 major types of packaging and talk about some of their advantages and disadvantages, and go a little bit deeper into each of them. So our first one is metals, and there are 3 general metals that encompass most of the food packaging in the US. The first is steel. An advantage of steel is that it's inexpensive. It's easily shaped into whatever shape you need it to be. We can have a hermetic closure or hermetic seal where nothing can get in or out once it has been sealed. But the big disadvantage of steel is that it is corrosive. It will corrode over time. In order to prevent that, the steel is usually coated with a thin layer of an enamel or a resin that will prevent substances from coming into contact with the steel that would corrode it. So especially, for example, if we have a high acidic food that is going into a can, it's definitely going to need something between that and the steel to serve as a barrier to prevent that corrosion. The second type is tin, and this is a little bit of a misnomer because if you have a tin can, actually less than 0.25% of the weight of the can is actually tin. The rest of it is steel. And so what a tin can is actually a steel can that has had tin coated on the interior, exterior of it. And the reason for that is that tin is less corrosive than steel. So it serves this same purpose as these other coatings on steel cans, just preventing corrosion. Aluminum cans. Advantages of aluminum is that it is lightweight. It's not corrosive, so we don't have to worry about it corroding or having enamel or resin coating it to prevent corrosion. It is aluminum is also easily shaped, but some of the disadvantages are that aluminum lacks structural strength and rigidity, so it's not the best for many applications. It's also higher cost. Now, we can reduce the cost by using recycled aluminum, but in general, it is higher cost versus steel. And so that is another reason that aluminum is implemented more so than in drink cans. Our next major group of packaging is glass packaging. And advantages of glass. There's 2 major advantages. One, it's transparent, so we can show off the food that we are trying to sell. Number 2, glass is chemically inert, so it doesn't matter what we put in there, we don't have to worry about anything corroding. And it will not affect the food in any way because the glass will not react with the food. The disadvantage of glass, of course, is that it is susceptible to breakage, right? Pretty obvious disadvantage there. So the thinner a glass is, the more likely it's actually going to break from just the pressure of heat processing. And the thicker the glass is, the more likely it's going to break due to temperature changes could be during processing or impact. So bottles hitting against each other or impacting against something else during transport. The other disadvantage of glass is that it weighs a lot more than most of our other packaging methods. And so using glass containers adds weight to our product in shipping and storage. All right, our third packaging material is paper. Advantages of paper is obviously that it's lightweight, it's low cost, paper is recyclable, but I'm sure you can think of the major disadvantage is that in order to achieve any kind of real seal, it's going to have to be combined with other substances. And so usually if paper is used as the primary food container, it's going to be coated with something. So like our milk containers, for example, have wax. It's vegetable stock containers. They're going to have a layer of plastic on the inside in addition to the paper. Some may have aluminum foil as another layer along with the paper to prevent, most often you're preventing contact with liquid, right? Because the liquid is going to disintegrate the paper. Our fourth packaging material is plastics. And so plastics in general are just long chains of a molecule of the same basic compound. The advantages of plastics are that they are lightweight, they're economical, they're easy to form, they're versatile. There's all different kinds of plastics. There's many types of plastics, and they can do very different things, right? We have, rigid plastics and softer plastics that are more like wrappings. We have some plastics that are clear and show off the product, some that are opaque and keep light off the product. And so there's a lot of versatility with plastic, and hence why a lot of food products are packaged in plastic. There are three main types of plastic, and it's just based on the chemical structure. So there's polymers, where there's just one basic unit of molecules that forms long chains. There's copolymers, and then with those you have two or more units of molecules that combine to make one material. And then there's ionomers, and the difference between the copolymers and polymers versus the ionomers is ionomers are held together with ionic bonds. And if you go back to our chemistry, ionic bonds are stronger than covalent bonds. And so those plastics tend to be stronger also. Okay, so then our fifth type is packaging films. And this is kind of a catch-all for a lot of materials that don't really have a category, okay? So we just call them packaging films. So examples of these are cellophane. So cellophane is made out of cellulose. And so I have a couple examples here. So here, these are sausages, but these are specifically Frankfurters, especially you could tell more so here and here, right? And when you use cellophane casings on sausages, you cook them in the cellophane, and so that gives the sausage their structure. And then when the sausages are done cooking, you peel the cellophane casing off. And so that's why sausage or hot dogs don't have a snappy casing that you bite into. They're like more naked than smoked sausages because they used to have a casing, but it was peeled off. And then like there's these spice packages that you see in the store that are stored in cellophane. Another example. Edible films would also fall in this category. So the book talks about these candies that are sold in Japan. They talk about seaweed candies. I don't think this one is a seaweed candy, but it is a Japanese candy. And what looks like plastic here is actually thin rice paper. And the paper itself is edible, and people eat the packaging along with the candy. Animal intestines for sausage casings would count as a packaging film that is edible. There are also films that are made out of starch or casein, which is like milk protein, that would also be edible. And then also edible coatings would also count as a packaging film. So these are liquids that are sprayed on or dipped, or the food is dipped into them. These function to protect food from mold, to slow rancidity development, and also potentially as a moisture barrier. So a couple examples of those are cucumbers, which usually have a wax coating that is sprayed on them. Cucumbers naturally have a wax coating, but in the process of washing them, it gets washed off, and so then the food producers add another wax coating back onto them. Raisins in Raisin Bran, you usually see a coating of sugar on them, and this actually equalizes the water activity. So raisins have a higher water activity than the bran that they are mixed with in Raisin Bran cereals. And so if you just put plain raisins into a cereal, the bran is going to become mushy because it's going to absorb some of the water from the raisins as the water activity tries to equalize. And the raisins are going to become rock solid because they're going to lose moisture. And so to prevent that, you can add a sugar coating to the raisins, and it lowers the water activity of the raisins while still keeping them moist in texture, and prevents that that kind of barrier prevents the water from migrating into the bran and making your bran mushy. All right, and our final packaging material is laminates. And this one, it may have multiple of the previous packaging materials that are a part of it, but the key thing is that there are fused layers of various substances, okay? And what those layers are going to depend on what the food is and what the needs for that food are. But here is an example as given in the book. Okay, so you have an outer layer that easily accepts printing. Okay, so cellophane easily accepts printing. So that's the outermost layer of the laminate. Then you have a moisture barrier is the next layer, and that's usually going to be a plastic. Then this particular item needs a stiff packaging, and so there is some kind of layer for stiffness. Paper could be it, nylon could be it. There's something there for stiffness. You also might need a layer for abrasion resistance, like this one shows nylon, that it makes the package more puncture proof, for example. Then there is a gas barrier, right? Many plastics still allow gas flow, and so you might want to use aluminum as your gas barrier in your packaging. Then there's a heat seal layer that when it's heated, it's going to fuse together, and so that might be plastic. And so that heat seal layer is going to be the innermost layer. But also something to consider is that between each of these 5 layers, there's going to need to be either a plastic or a non-toxic glue that helps seal everything together. Okay, so there's multiple parts of these laminates, and that is the key thing to understand about them, is that it's just multiple fused layers of substances that all serve a specific function for that packaging. So those were all types of packaging. And now I'm going to go into a kind of separate area. This is not a type of packaging, but a functional packaging that will use those types that we've already talked about, okay, to deliver a specific function. Okay, and so this is reduced oxygen packaging. One thing that you should have definitely learned by now in this class is that oxygen damages food and it provides a medium for microbial growth, right? A lot of our microbes that cause damage are aerobic and need oxygen to grow. So oxygen damages the food and reduces the shelf life through both of those mechanisms. And so there are types of packaging that we can use to prevent that oxygen damage. We can use controlled atmosphere packaging. We can use modified atmosphere packaging, and we'll go over what those differences are. And we can use things like oxygen scavengers or desiccants. Now, desiccants are not technically reduced oxygen packaging, and the book acts like they are, and so that's why I have this in red, and we'll get into that more. So the biggest functions why we use packaging that reduces oxygen is in produce. It's going to slow the ripening process. It's going to delay maturation or softening of foods. It's going to reduce microbial spoilage, slow enzymatic browning that we need oxygen to occur, and also prevent tissue damage that's caused by chilling. So controlled atmosphere packaging, that first one. The way controlled atmosphere packaging works, or CAP, is it uses barriers just to control and maintain the gases around the food. So there's no gases that are being added or removed. Well, should change that. There's no gases being added, but once that food is packaged, it's just controlling what is there. So examples, packaging that absorbs oxygen. I could not think of or find, I'm sure there are some real world examples, but I don't know. But there was this picture, I found it like a company that manufactures this packaging here, and it actually absorbs oxygen. There's also semi-permeable packaging, and that's what I was talking about earlier with produce. So you buy these packages like HEB that it's produce that is fresh and chilled, but it's a sealed package. And if this package did not allow gases to be exchanged, it would go rotten really fast because all of that CO2 would be trapped in there and contributing to the ripening process, and there wouldn't be any oxygen to keep those produce, vegetables or fruits alive. So it would get rotten and mushy really quick. But that packaging does allow that gas exchange and keeps the produce fresh longer. So fruits will still respire, fruits and vegetables will still respire once they've been removed from the plant, and that packaging allows the oxygen in, the CO2 out, and leaves the water vapor in there so nothing gets dehydrated. Okay, I would classify vacuum packaging under this controlled atmosphere packaging also. You take out all the air and then you're controlling nothing else is getting in or out. Okay. So modified atmosphere packaging is the second main ROP type. And with modified atmosphere, the difference between this and controlled atmosphere is that we are flushing the container with a gas that we want before sealing. So we are changing the gas makeup before we even seal the product. Okay. So most often, this is going to be a combination of carbon dioxide and nitrogen. And the reason that we use those, carbon dioxide has some antimicrobial effects. And so it's pretty useful in applications where uh, spoilage organisms are a concern. So, for example, in packaged lunch meats, you will usually have some level of CO2 that that package has been flushed with, and that helps extend the shelf life so that some aerobic bacteria don't grow. The remainder would be nitrogen, and the reason nitrogen is used is because it, number one, first and foremost, it's inert. It doesn't react with anything. And number two, it's very easily available. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. And so it's very cost effective to use nitrogen. So chip bags, these are flushed with nitrogen. And that the reason that we want to use that in chips is that there's a lot of polyunsaturated oils in chips, and they would get rancid really quick if the environment was filled with oxygen. So it is flushed with nitrogen, and that lets those chips have a very long shelf life up until they're opened. And then after they're open, they can get stale from oxygen much more quickly than they would just remaining in that sealed package. Raw meats are a little bit different. We actually might package them with high oxygen on purpose, or we might use a low amount of carbon monoxide. And yeah, you heard that right, monoxide. Both of these result in a red myoglobin pigment. So the pretty color that you associate with raw meat. So if you see a package like this that has a headspace over the top of it and the packaging itself is not touching the meat, this is definitely a modified atmosphere package that has either high oxygen or a low amount of carbon monoxide. So the disadvantage of high oxygen is that usually not as quickly as if it were just exposed to the regular oxygen in the air, but it will eventually end up with lipid oxidation from the high oxygen. High oxygen is actually better than the 20% oxygen that is in our air for as far as lipid oxidation is concerned. Higher oxygen will result in less lipid oxidation than a lower amount of oxygen, and there's some chemical reasons behind that we won't get into, but that is why. And that high oxygen leads to a very nice bright cherry red color. Now, see, carbon monoxide will also bind to the meat pigments just like oxygen. You have a very, very low amount. So unless you are like opening multiple packages and like where the hole is, breathing it in, there's no real concern for anyone to get ill from it. And it is definitely approved by USDA, but carbon monoxide also turns meat a bright cherry red. Now, another way that you will see this happen is through, this is called case-ready packaging. And what you have here is this bigger bag here is called a mother bag. And this bag is the bag that the modified atmosphere gas has been put into. The smaller packages are just the PVC overwrapped packages that you see in the grocery store. And so, that overwrap package is susceptible to gas exchange. Oxygen can get in and out of it. It's the gas that is exposed to the meat is whatever gas is in the air where the meat is sitting. Why they use this is the meat is transported from the processor to the grocery store in these bags, and it gives the meat a longer shelf life until it's put out for display. So for these, you could have two ways to do it. You could have this high O2 or low CO2 in this mother bag, which would give you the red, cherry red color while it's in the mother bag. And then you put it out, and the red color can come from just the oxygen that's in the air. Or you could have this mother bag that has higher CO2 and a nitrogen combination. And what happens there is this meat's not going to be very pretty in this mother bag because carbon dioxide and nitrogen don't give a cherry red color to the myoglobin. But when they take it out of the mother bag, so it's not going to look very pretty, but it is going to extend the shelf life because, again, you have eliminated oxygen, so you're preventing lipid oxidation and any aerobic bacteria growth that from bacteria that like oxygen. You are also potentially reducing growth further by having CO2 in there. And so you extend the shelf life before it gets into the case by doing this. And then when you open that bag and you take these packages out of the case, now, like I said, this overwrap allows free gas flow. And so you just get the oxygen that is naturally in the air exposed to this, and it will redden right up and look perfectly like great fresh red ground beef or whatever other meat that you have. So kind of cool technologies that the meat industry uses, and it's not falsifying anything or adding anything that is damaging or concerning. It's just using the natural qualities of myoglobin to, I guess, give the color that consumers are wanting, and using the natural qualities of gases to prevent growth of microorganisms and extend shelf life. Something else I was going to say on here. Okay. All right. And so then the last thing I want to talk about as far as reduced oxygen packaging is oxygen scavengers and desiccants. These are two separate things. The book is talking about desiccants, and then it tells you about these packets that remove oxygen and calls them a desiccant. That is absolutely wrong. If you say that, I'm marking off, okay? Because the definition of desiccant means something that dries something else out, okay? And that's not what these do when they're removing oxygen, okay? So they have their terms confused. So with the oxygen scavengers, the scavenger is made so that it reacts with oxygen before it can react with food. Before the oxygen can react with the food. So it protects the food by preferentially taking in that oxygen and reacting with it itself. So usually this oxygen scavenger, if you opened up the little packet that says do not eat, there is just going to be like, there's a powder that is iron, and then it will have sodium chloride in it. And sometimes it'll have carbon in it, but the main components are the iron and sodium chloride usually. And the way that it works is that iron reacts with oxygen to form iron oxide. And the reason the sodium chloride is in there is that it's a catalyst that speeds up that reaction. Okay, so it helps that reaction be more efficient, more effective. And so actually, if you ate this, if it just had the iron and sodium chloride, it wouldn't hurt you. But okay, so then desiccants are something totally different, and they actually probably don't even belong in this discussion on reduced oxygen packaging because desiccants do not reduce oxygen, okay? But we're still going to talk about them because they are kind of similar to oxygen scavengers. They just remove something else, okay? So desiccants, they're usually a silica gel. It might say that on the little packet. And their function is to remove water vapor. Okay, not oxygen at all, but water vapor. So examples here. So this is a lunch meat package, and if you see a little packet in that, it's definitely an oxygen scavenger. If you see a packet in beef jerky or I buy like the big bags of bacon bits from Costco. Those have a packet. Those are oxygen scavengers. Those are there to prevent lipid oxidation of those meat products. Then you might see this in beef jerky too, since you're potentially trying to keep it dry. But this picture here is nuts, and it actually has both. Okay, and it's hard to see it here, but one of these is an oxygen scavenger, and one of them is a desiccant. And nuts need both, right? Oxygen causes rancidity of nuts, and water can cause things like things like mold in the nuts, right? And so you might potentially have two packets in some foods that are performing two different functions. Okay, so then our next bit of discussion is going to be on biotechnology in foods. And what we mean by this is basically GMOs. Okay, so we're going to get into GMOs today. So biotechnology is the process of altering organisms or any part of these organisms to create new or improved products. Okay, so by organisms, we're talking about plants, animals, or microbes. We're not going to talk too much about microbes in this section, but I just want to say we've talked about this before. Genetically modified microbes have been used extensively for production of enzymes, amino acids, and flavorings that are then used in the food industry. They're also used to make human proteins for use in medicine. So this type of biotechnology has been around the longest and has the most organisms that have been genetically engineered. Okay. So the old way of genetic selection was that you would pick plants or animals that have the desired qualities that you are looking for, and you would cultivate or breed them. And it could take years to get a certain result. So some examples of that. So this is, the ancient ancestor of our modern day corn. And over time, humans selected for this, and this is our corn today. Okay. And so you wouldn't even recognize these as the same thing. Bananas are another example. So this is the kind of original banana. And today we have something that is much bigger, does not have all of these seeds, and is really absolutely nothing like what the original banana looked like. Now, believe it or not, this is actually the old way of genetic selection. It's just through breeding. So chickens since the 1950s have changed quite a bit. We're probably still looking like this 2005. I don't think it's gotten much bigger than this. But chickens that are bred for meat have been bred over time to select for bigger and bigger breasts. And so you started out with this, skinny little thing here, and now our meat chickens are so big that you have to slaughter them by a certain age, because if they can't get past that age and they continue growing, they cannot walk at all. And it's not humane. But all of that is just through, just regular selection and breeding with the chicken. Okay, and so now the new way of selecting for things is through genetic engineering. And so this is going to be the altering of genetic material by adding, removing, or rearranging genes using modern molecular biology. Okay, so we have a gene and we just take a piece out and put a new piece in, or just take a piece out and leave it out, or moving things around. Okay, so this process of genetic engineering produces a genetically modified organism, GMO, or another word for that means the same thing, is a transgenic organism. Okay, and so kind of another visual here, the old way with conventional breeding is that you had, two different plants and you breed them together and you're going to get aspects of both of them, right? And some of the aspects that you transfer over might be good. Those are the ones that you're selecting for. And some of them might be less desirable. And then you have to go through more process to weed out the less desirable attributes. Versus this genetic modification, genetic engineering, you have, your regular fruit. And in this example, you have a bacteria that has a gene that makes it insect resistant. So you take that gene that makes it insect resistant, that causes the production of a protein that when the insects ingest it, it's actually a toxin to the insects only. And so now it's part with genetic modification of that fruit, and the fruit is now insect resistant, and it only transferred that one attribute that you were selecting for when you cut it out of that gene, and not all of the other junk that you didn't want. Okay. So the applications of this. So it all sounds kind of scary. But I will say most GMO crops grown in the U.S. are used for animal food. You're not consuming them directly. Most, not all. There are some, and we'll talk about which ones they are. But this is directly from what FDA says, is that most are used for animal food. There is a recent law that went into effect in 2023 and is completely mandatory starting of June of this year. So most food companies have already put it into place. They're not going to wait until the deadline to label all their foods. But what this law requires is that food manufacturers, importers, and retailers disclose when there are detectable levels of genetic material for bioengineered foods. Okay, now this part here is kind of important, and it's kind of like an asterisk, because it doesn't require them to disclose that they used bioengineered foods, but that there's detectable, it only requires them to disclose it if there's detectable levels of genetic material. So a lot of GMO foods, I should say some of them, especially when we're talking about corn, what is getting into the food supply is things like cornstarch and corn syrup. And those things are so processed that there may not be detectable levels of genetic material in those foods. And so according to this law, at that point, it wouldn't have to be disclosed. Okay. Additionally, it's not going to say in shouting big words necessarily. It may on some labels. May say probably not big words, but it'll say, contains bioengineered foods. And so bioengineered is just another word for GMO. But it may only have a QR code or a phone number to call, and not actually explicitly say on the package that it is bioengineered. Or that QR code may be sitting there at the grocery store right next to, like on the sign where it says the price of the food or something. So you have to be an informed consumer if you are trying to avoid these things. Okay. Now, FDA does require a full safety review of all the bioengineered foods. So Nobody can just put it on the market without FDA's okay and them looking at it and determining that they feel it's safe. So currently in the US, this is a lot just for your personal benefit that I'm going through these, but I might ask you what some of the foods are, but all of the extra information that I'm giving you with these is really just kind of for your personal benefit. There are 14 current foods or crops that are on the National Bioengineered List, which means if it's not one of these 14 foods, there are no genetically modified items of that food on the market. Okay, so the first is canola. All right, so makes canola oil, right? There are many different genetically engineered varieties of canola. Some are for herbicide tolerance. So when we're talking herbicide tolerance, we're talking most of the time it's like the Roundup Ready stuff, where they can spray Roundup on that crop and the crop will not be harmed, but all of the weeds around it will be killed. Okay. Engineered for disease resistance, so keeping that canola from being susceptible to some kind of plant disease that it's normally susceptible to. Increasing the lauric acid, so changing the fatty acid profile of the canola to make it more healthy. And reducing phytate. Now the purpose of this one is really just for canola as a use in animal feed, canola meal. Canola can be sometimes high in phytate, which prevents other nutrients from being absorbed. And so reduced phytate canola makes the canola meal better as a livestock food. So then corn is probably, your most well-known crop that has a lot of GMO. There are varieties that are for insect resistance and for herbicide tolerance, so your Roundup Ready corn, as well as drought tolerance. No sweet corn is bioengineered, just field corn. But that field corn is used to make cornstarch and corn syrup, which, like I said, may not be labeled since they're highly processed. But otherwise, this corn is used for livestock feed. Okay, soybeans. There are varieties for, again, herbicide tolerance, so Roundup Ready soybeans, insect resistance. Most of these that are insect resistance, they have kind of what I was alluding to earlier. There is bacteria. I'll get into that in a second. I have another slide that I'll talk about that. Insect resistance, but most of these insect resistant ones are very similar, and we'll get into that. Also, there is soybeans that have an altered oil profile, giving them high oleic acid to try to make the soybean oils more healthy. As far as soybeans, 80% of global soybean production is bioengineered. And in the US, it's 90%. So you're going to have a hard time finding soybeans at all in the US that are not bioengineered. So if it is a concern and you like something that has soybeans in it, you want to find something usually organic. If it says organic, then it definitely will not have any bioengineered foods in it. Okay. Then sugar beets. So we've talked about sugar beets before and how sugar beets are the main source of sugar these days. 90% of sugar beets in the US is bioengineered. So that's most of the sugar in the US is coming from bioengineered sugar beets. And they are bioengineered for herbicide tolerance, so Roundup Ready. Then sugar cane. These are mostly for insect resistance, and not Roundup Ready on the sugar cane. All right, and continuing on, Okay, so papaya, uh, virtually all of the papaya in the US is genetically modified, uh, unless it specifies otherwise. Uh, so papaya in the US is grown in Hawaii, and they were really infested with this virus called ring spot virus. And if it weren't for bioengineering, the papaya market would have been completely wiped out in the US. And so that's the only reason bioengineering is the only reason we have papayas at all, really, in the United States. Pineapple, there is a pink flesh variety of pineapple. Uh, and if it doesn't have pink flesh, it's not bioengineered. That's the only one. Okay, apple. There is a brand of apples called Arctic brand, and they're bioengineered to uh, not brown. These apples are sold as pre-packaged sliced apples, and they're going to have that Arctic branding on them. So they're pretty easy to spot as long as you know Arctic is that bioengineered apple that doesn't brown on them. Okay. Potatoes. So there are varieties that have reduced bruising. They are reduced or increased ability to not brown, I guess. Less browning, reduced acrylamide formation in frying, so it makes them healthier, more safe when they're frying, resistant to blight and insect resistance. So potatoes were one of the first bioengineered foods to be introduced in the US, and they did not take off. And so the original bioengineered potatoes, they are no longer even being made. There is this new one that is called Innate, and its marketing strategy is that they have not put genes from any other species in the potato. They've actually used potato genes and uh, just replaced different genes in the potato with genes from another potato that had the qualities that they were looking for. And so all of the bioengineering is potato genes going into potatoes. And so that's their marketing strategy, why, and their hope that it will sell better than the other bioengineered potatoes that failed in the past. Eggplants, there's an insect-resistant variety of eggplants, but this is made in Bangladesh, and you can't transport fresh eggplant from Bangladesh to the US. So in reality, there's really no fresh eggplant in the US that is bioengineered. Possibly if you found some that was canned or something that came from Bangladesh, but there's none made in the US. And then yellow squash, about 10% of the yellow squash in the US is bioengineered, and it's engineered to be resistant to viruses that do things like this to the yellow squash. Okay, so there's 3 more. There's salmon. Okay, so there is a salmon, bioengineered salmon that is called Aquadvantage salmon, and it has increased growth rate. So these two fish are the same age, and this one is, I don't know, like 4 or 5 times as big. And so their thought is just being more efficient, less pollution, less danger to the environment by growing them bigger, faster. So this one is technically approved for use, but the product was universally rejected by retailers. It probably started about 5 or 6 years ago. And all the retailers were like, nope, we're not selling that. Our customers aren't going to buy it, and they'll be upset if we are selling it. And the wholesalers even were like, nope, we're not doing that. If somebody catches wind of us doing that, they're not going to be buying anything from us. And so, like, it was utter failure because nobody would buy it. And the facility that produced them was, it shuttered its doors this past December. So it's no longer being produced. And the last two are pretty much only for livestock feed or not going really into food. But alfalfa, there's varieties for herbicide tolerance, as well as low lignin. So lignin is like, it's like a super fiber that is in grasses, and the older the grass is, the higher the lignin is, and the less digestible the hay is for the livestock. And so if you have less lignin, it's more digestible, and there's more nutrients that the livestock can absorb, and so it's better for them. And then cotton, there's varieties for herbicide tolerance as well as insect resistance. So bollworms are a major crop killer for cotton, and so the insect resistance is designed to prevent those. Okay, so concerns about genetically altered foods. So one concern is a contamination of conventional crops with GMO crops. So if a conventional crop that is not genetically modified is contaminated with GMO crops, those farmers can potentially lose access to markets where they're assuring that their product is not genetically modified. Or even if their product is supposed to be organic, right? And the GMO contaminates their crop, and somebody does some testing and determines, well, now they're mixed and it's got genetically modified genes in it, they can no longer qualify as organic anymore. So that can be really dangerous for farmers. And pollen travels with the wind, and so I know in some regions in Canada, they don't even try to produce conventional crops of canola anymore because there's so much GMO canola that they don't stand a chance, because it will definitely get contaminated with pollen from the other canola fields that are genetically modified. So it can be a real big burden to farmers who are trying to not have genetically modified crops. Like I said, their organic certification can be revoked, and they can face lawsuits from seed companies. So even though they did not try to steal this genetically modified crop, there's a patent on it, right? And now they have those genes that are patented, but they didn't pay for them, even if they didn't mean to, and the seed companies can sue them. So it's kind of a disaster in some ways for a lot of farmers. And so, like I said, that pollen can contaminate plants and result in non-GMO plants that have the produce of those plants is now GMO, because that's how plants breed, right? And so how they can prevent this? You can plant your non-GMO crop earlier or later than the nearby GMO crop, so that the pollen, the fruiting season where pollen is spreading is not the same as the GMO crops around it, and then also just planting as far away as possible. Hold on. So, okay, yeah. Okay, so then also GMO seeds from crops are often sterile, or they're not allowed to be used for planting. So, in traditional methods of farming, the farmers would save back some of their seeds and use those for planting for the next season. Well, in the current environment, you're not allowed to do that. Either those seeds are going to be sterile anyways, because that's how they have been engineered, or even if they're not, that company says, no, you have to purchase from us each time. You are not allowed to reuse these seeds. And again, they will sue the farmers if they do. So it is a higher cost to farmers buying seed annually for planting and not being able to save back like they used to do in the past. Then finally, there's there's actually more after this, but there's also potential consequences of GMO animals escaping into the wild. which was a big concern with the salmon. Now, how they got around this is the genetically modified salmon were sterile, so they were not able to breed, and they were raised inland in the U.S. So they did not raise them in the ocean. They raised them like in tanks in Indiana. So nowhere near the ocean, so they couldn't, there was no concern about them ever accidentally being released. However, the eggs that these started out as were produced near the ocean in Canada. And so people would ask, okay, so what if those eggs, because they're so close to the ocean, somehow got into the ocean and they got released? I don't know that it ever happened, but okay, so other concerns, insect-resistant plants may harm beneficial insects. There were some early varieties of bioengineered crops that did actually like kill butterflies, but the current varieties, which are based around Bt, do not. So Bt stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, and that is a bacteria that produces a protein that kills pests. So it's a toxin to insects. It is only a toxin in their guts. They have alkaline guts versus our acidic guts, which just destroy that toxin and it doesn't affect us. So the plants are modified to produce that same protein toxin, and it acts as an insecticide. So insecticidal plants may lead to resistant insects, and this is something that has been studied, and it does occur if you're not careful. How farmers do try to prevent this is they have their GMO crop that has the Bt gene in it, and then they'll have a non-GMO crop that is planted near it. And what that does is it provides safe harbor to some of the insects. It's just kind of like, okay, destroy that one. And why would you do that is because it allows some non-resistant insects to survive and then mate with any insects that are becoming resistant to the Bt, and thus reducing the overall resistance, right? So you have the resistant mating with the non-resistant and producing progeny that are less resistant to the Bt variety than if you had only those resistant insects breeding. If that makes sense. Okay. And then a final concern would be the increased use of herbicides. All right. So Roundup Ready is the most common herbicide-resistant genetically modified organism, and so any of those that are the Roundup Ready GMO crops, that means that they're spraying Roundup on it. And so there is an increased use of herbicides associated with those crops. And there's lots of concerns about, do we actually want that in our food? So for me personally, this one is probably the biggest concern about genetically altered foods. A lot of the other ones I'm not so concerned with, because you consuming genetic material, it just gets destroyed in your gut. But the association with more herbicide being added is certainly a negative. So, all right, so that is all we have for this chapter. I know it went a little bit long, and like I said, I gave you a lot more information than on all of these genetically modified crops and things than you actually need to know, but I thought it was of interest and would be just good personal knowledge for you as a consumer. So, all right, one more chapter left after this. Yay!